In today's Passion narrative, once again, Mark's gospel shows a Jesus who is almost completely out of control. And by the time you get to John's gospel, you have a Jesus who is in complete control. Specifically, for the Passion narratives, I wanted to do a side-by-side comparison of Jesus' last words as a way of showing this progression. In today's Passion narrative, Mark shows a Jesus who is feeling abandoned by God when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It's a rather horrifying image to hear coming from Jesus, but it illustrates exactly what Mark's community was going through at the time. Mark was written just following the destruction of the temple in the year 70. So, in addition to their identity essentially being stripped away without their only place of worship, the bloodshed that led up to its destruction was very fresh in their minds. So when Jesus says, my God, why have you abandoned me?" it spoke to Mark's community because they had many family and friends who died in that same way, i.e., feeling abandoned by God. The question, where was God in all of this, was probably asked quite often from them. Furthermore, Mark's gospel pretty much implies this question when it ends without an appearance of the resurrected Jesus. If any of you have read the Gospel of Mark, you might recall that there is a longer and shorter ending. These are not part of the original Greek manuscripts. With the two separate endings, in addition to the language sounding very different from Mark's first century Greek, scholars concluded that these endings are most probably added by multiple scribes copying this gospel. In the earliest copies of Mark that we have, the women go into an empty tomb, are told Jesus has arisen, and are instructed to go tell Peter and the disciples. However, they don't tell anyone because they were terrified. And the gospel ends. The resurrected Jesus never appears in Mark. It is, in my opinion, without a doubt, the most dramatic ending of all four gospels. But it shows very much what Mark's community was feeling. Like the women, they too were terrified. It was a time in their lives where they felt like Jesus was absent, almost as if he wasn't there at all. However, in stark contrast to this very human and down-to-earth passion in Mark, about 3 decades later, John has a Jesus much more elevated and, as a result, more in control. As an example, rather than falling down to the ground and begging God to spare him from what was to come in Mark, Jesus has so much more control in John's gospel that Judas, a band of soldiers, the guards, the chief priests, and the Pharisees are the ones who fall to the ground. And finally, even when he is on the cross, he is still in complete control when he simply says, "It is finished." As a result, the progression of Mark's to John's gospel shows how these communities evolved over time. Jesus' passion starts out very down to earth in Mark, then gradually gains a bit more control in Matthew, but then is much more in control in Luke when he says, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And leading up to John, Jesus is in full control of everything that happens in the passion narratives. He's very much the opposite of being down to earth. His kingdom, as John's gospel states, is not of this world. Now, why does this all matter? Just as I said last week, it's important to see these four communities as being unique from each other. And as such, it's important to note that, despite their similarities, they might have different perspectives when telling the good news of Jesus. And that is completely okay. But despite theirs, as well as our different perspectives, we are still all equally followers of Christ.